Welcome to the Training for Translators podcast.
Do better work, earn more money, and enjoy your job with our weekly episodes for ambitious freelance translators and interpreters.
Visit our website at trainingfortranslators.com to subscribe to our newsletter, learn more about our upcoming classes, or read blog post versions of our podcast.
Now here's your host, Corinne McKay.
Greetings, listeners. This is Corinne McKay from Training for Translators with episode 1 of the Training for Translators podcast. I've mentioned a couple times in my newsletter that this podcast is an idea that I have had in the works for a year or maybe more. So thank you for being here for episode 1 as it officially comes to life. So if we are meeting for the first time, I run Training for Translators. I am a French to English translator and French English interpreter based in beautiful Boulder, Colorado in the Rocky Mountains of the United States. I've been a freelancer since 2002, and I am certified by the American Translators Association for French to English translation. I'm Colorado Court certified for French interpreting, and I have a master's in conference interpreting from Glendon College. And my business right now is about 60% interpreting, which is divided about equally between court and conference interpreting. In 2023, I did about 100 court assignments and about 90 conference days, and I translated the rest of the time and also run Training for Translators. And I also wrote a book called How to Succeed as a Freelance Translator that has now sold about 15,000 copies, and maybe some of you have read. So that's a bit about me. So my idea with this podcast, at the moment at least, is that it's going to be pretty simple, really just me reading past posts from the Training for Translators blog and commenting on them. But if you would like to read a text version of this episode, or if you would like to leave a comment on it, it was originally posted on my blog on July 30th, 2024. The title is Pros and Cons of Pricing by the Word, by the Project, or by the Hour. And if you put the words pros and cons into the search box on my blog, which you can find at the blog tab at trainingfortranslators.com, you will find this post and you can read it or you can comment on it. So here we go. This week's topic is the pros and cons of pricing by the word, by the project, and by the hour. Pricing is stressful, no matter how long you have been freelancing. As someone who has been freelancing now for 22 years, I now find pricing moderately less stressful than I did when I was a beginning freelancer, but not completely stress-free. As an example, I recently had not one, but 2 interpreting clients offer more money than what I had asked them for. That was a real ugh moment. As a person who teaches classes about such things for other freelancers, and still I had the feeling that I left money on the table. So today we're going to talk about pricing written translations, not spoken interpreting, which in my opinion is a completely different topic, perhaps for a future episode, and the advantages and disadvantages of pricing by the word, by the project, or by the hour. Let's start with pricing by the word. There are honestly a lot of disadvantages to pricing by the word, but yet it holds on as the de facto standard in the translation world. When I was preparing this episode, I thought to myself, have I ever worked for a translation agency that did not price translation projects by the word? And here I'm not talking about, editing, proofreading, things like that. I'm talking about just for straight translation. I honestly don't believe that I have ever worked for a translation agency that priced translations other than by the word. So why is this? Honestly, partially, I think it's just habit. This is the way we do it because this is the way we have always done it. And partially, I think It's because it is totally straightforward. So if you look at the advantages of pricing translation by the word, I actually know, for example, content marketing writers who price by the word as well. The advantage is that with a translation, particularly if you price by the source word, so that's the original document, if you're not familiar with that term, everybody knows exactly, literally to the cent, how much that translation is going to cost before the translator even starts. So if a client approaches you for a 1,000 word translation and you quote 20 cents a word, it's going to cost $200 whether it takes you 2 hours or 10 hours to do the translation. And obviously, there are some advantages there. The client, and for that matter, everyone else in the equation, knows ahead of time how much the translation is going to cost. The translator has an incentive to specialize or become more efficient, which I think also has a downside. I'll talk more about that later. And perhaps most importantly, from the translator standpoint, experienced translators tend to earn more because they work faster. So when you specialize and when you get more experienced, you get faster. I would roughly estimate that my translation speed has doubled from maybe 250 words a minute to 500 words, or sorry, a minute, I wish 250 words an hour to about 500 words an hour in the time that in the 22 years that I've been a translator, because I specialize and because I've gotten more experienced. So my real sense here is just that per word pricing generally hangs on because it's simple, but it also has some major downsides. Some clients, not the kinds of clients you want to work with, but some clients may try to split hairs over the word count. There are, I think, somewhat legitimate reasons for that, and then other reasons. So the somewhat legitimate reason, I would say, is different tools count words in surprisingly different manners. So for example, if you have ever taken a Word document, or you could do an experiment on this if you've never done it, you can take a Word document and count the words in, let's say, Microsoft Word, a specialized word counting tool like AnyCount, and a translation memory program. And they will give back pretty different word counts because they count words in different manners. Some tools include text boxes, some don't. Some include headers and footers, some don't. Some include the actual footnotes, and some don't, etc. Then you have the additional factor that if you're talking about a Romance language and English, and those are the language combinations I'm familiar with, so I actually don't know the statistic for, let's say, Asian languages. But between Romance languages and English, you're going to have a word count difference of about 30%. The Romance language is going to be about 30% longer. And of course, the translator has an economic incentive to use the higher count, and the client has an economic incentive to use the lower count. Then you get into what I was talking about with hair splitting. The client wants you to subtract repeated text. Well, all you did was copy and paste it. At the start of my career, when I was pretty much taking on any work I could get, I even had clients who wanted to not pay for things like proper names and numbers, quote unquote, because you're not really translating them. Now, the thing is, first of all, that's petty. Right? We're talking about, for a person's name, 2 to 3 words. It is also not really accurate, not fully accurate, because if we take French to English, which is my translation language combination, often the last name, family name, surname in the French document is going to be in all capital letters, and you have to change that to just an initial cap, or the commas and decimals are reversed, or that language's numbering system uses a space instead of a comma. Thousand separator, for example. So all of that to me is that, sort of nickel and diming, as we would say in US English, is really frustrating from the translator's point of view. Number 2, the translator is economically incentivized to either rush or take on too much work in order to make more money. Now, to be clear, Many translators don't work like this. Many translators are thinking, I'm being paid fairly for the project overall. So if I take half an hour to research a term, I'm not looking at it as I just got paid, 20 cents for half an hour of work. I'm looking at what I make for the project overall. But I just think it's true. It's an economic fact that there is a disincentive to take, half an hour to research one term when you're getting paid in cents per word. So the flip side of that is disadvantage number 3, the translator is essentially penalized for spending extra time on the translation. So this is one reason that I often say you actually do your clients a favor when you charge a rate at which you are being paid fairly. So when I talk to translation agency project managers, one of their biggest pet peeves is translators who take on too much work in order to make more money, and then the translations are late or sloppy or both. So I actually think in the end, you don't do your clients any favors if you're sitting there thinking, I'm not going down the research rabbit hole here because I simply can't afford to because I'm being paid in cents per word. Next up is per project pricing. But first, a brief message from Training for Translators. Greetings, listeners. If you're enjoying this podcast, you should think about taking a class with Training for Translators. You can learn more about that at my website, trainingfortranslators.com. My self-paced 4-week classes, Getting Started as a Freelance Translator or Interpreter in the Age of AI, and Direct Client Marketing Launchpad, run twice a year and are always open for registration. You can also check out our monthly masterclasses taught by me and a select roster of guest instructors. After my recent masterclass on marketing to direct clients and increasing your income, a student commented, "This class was just what I was looking for. It introduced a whole new set of marketing methods and helped me set realistic expectations for myself." I really appreciated that Corinne included both practical steps and concrete examples to support her recommendations. If you'd like those types of results in your own business, hop on over to trainingfortranslators.com and click the Upcoming Classes tab. Welcome back. And now let's talk about per project pricing. To be honest, per project pricing is probably my favorite way to price for a few reasons. It gives the client one number to focus on. So the client can just answer the question, how much is this going to cost us? And it also saves the translator from committing to a per word rate that applies in every situation. I get a lot of inquiries from translators who want to know about sort of tweaking their per word rate, but just slightly. For example, could I increase my rate a little bit if the source document is an uneditable PDF, so I have to start from scratch in Microsoft Word, when usually for this client, I would use my translation memory program? What if the source text is a little bit more dense or more technical than what I usually do for this client? What if it's a little bit rush, but not hair on fire rush? Normally I tell this client that I can do, 1,800 words a day at my regular rate, and now it's 2,100 words. I would argue that per project pricing solves all of those dilemmas because you are just giving the client one number. In my opinion, there's only one issue with per project pricing, and here it is. It can seem opaque to the client. Some clients are going to ask, what is this based on? I'm also a big proponent of pricing in non-round numbers. So for example, if you quote a client $1,000, I think sometimes that sounds a little bit arbitrary. Whereas if you quote either 980 or 1,010, it sounds less arbitrary. So some clients inevitably are going to ask you, what is this rate based on, or where did it come from? And I have had clients ask that, not in a, aggressive manner, but have asked, just out of curiosity, what is that rate based on? And in my opinion, that is not a reason to avoid per project pricing, because it's easy enough to explain to the client that the quote includes a number of different factors: length, format, difficulty, deadline, all those things. But it is something to be prepared for. But overall, I think per project is my favorite way to price. Just that, as I said at the top of the episode, I have never worked for a translation agency that would allow per project pricing. That isn't to say that they don't exist, but I do mostly per project pricing, almost exclusively per project pricing with my direct clients. Finally, let's take a look at hourly billing. Interestingly enough, hourly billing is probably the most common increment in many professional service sectors, while it remains the least common in the translation world. Attorneys, accountants, language teachers, software trainers, editors, they mostly all bill by the hour. Hourly billing is transparent for the client, and it guarantees that the translator is going to be paid for all of their time. How could we not love hourly billing? Well, hourly billing has a huge downside, which is that either the translator or the client has to absorb some uncertainty. If the translator says, for example, your 1,000 word translation is going to take me 3 hours, then the client has security about how much it's going to cost, but the translator is taking a risk, which can go both ways. So maybe this translation ends up taking 2 hours, and the translator sort of, reaps the upside of that. But on the other hand, maybe it's one of those situations that I talked about in per project pricing. Maybe it turns out to be a, crummy PDF that has been folded in an attorney's pocket and then scanned and photocopied a million times. Maybe it is that document that is, slightly denser or slightly more technical than what we usually do for that client. And all of a sudden, our 1,000 word translation has taken 4 hours. If we have committed upfront to a number of hours, that is really not that different than just charging by the word. On the flip side, if the translator says to the client, look, your 1,000 word translation might take me between 2 and 4 hours, the client may get nervous. Let's say that this particular translator charges $90 an hour. There's a pretty huge difference between $180 and $360, and the client is not going to know until you send the bill. And what if instead of a 1,000 word translation, we were talking about a 30,000 word translation? Now we start to see why hourly billing is not as simple as it might seem. To wrap up, I don't have a definite answer to this question, but especially if you work for direct clients, I think the real key here is that it is up to you to decide how to bill them. Michael Schubert, who is a US-based German to English translator whose business advice I really admire, observed correctly, I think, that most translators default to per word pricing, even with direct clients, while most clients, as Michael said, don't know to count words until we teach them to count words. And that, I think, is excellent food for thought. That brings us to the end of episode 1 of the Training for Translators podcast. Thank you so much for being here for the inaugural episode. The podcast is hosted by me, Corinne McKay. The intro and outro were created and recorded by Shadow Studio. The podcast is hosted on Libsyn and recorded and mixed in Audacity using a Shure MV7 Plus microphone. A special shout out to my friend and colleague Amélie Roy for that microphone recommendation. I hope that you will subscribe to Training for Translators in your favorite podcast episode. And most of all, I hope that this episode was useful, and I hope that you'll be here for the future episodes. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Training for Translators podcast, helping you do better work, earn more money, and enjoy your job.
To leave a comment, learn more about our upcoming classes, or read blog post versions of our podcast, visit our website at trainingfortranslators.com.
If you enjoy the Training for Translators podcast, please tell your colleagues and friends about it and leave us a review in your favorite podcast app.